We are live. I'm Colleen Shogan from In Pursuit, and I'm here with Greg Jackson. And Greg, you are new to In Pursuit because you're not one of our authors, but you're an extraordinary historian and history communicator. Really amazing background with a top 10 history podcast, History That Doesn't Suck. And you're also a stage performer, you're a college professor, you're a new book author. So, tell us, how did you get involved? I mean, a lot of people are academic historians. How did you get involved in doing what you do, communicating history in such new and unique ways?
Well, Colleen, you're kind. Thank you. I it really started as I began my life as an assistant professor, tenure track, and that was
Mhm.
exciting for about 5 minutes. And I'm not saying that to take away from academia. I love academia. I'm an academic, but it really struck me how much we spend our time talking to each other. Now, that's an important thing. I'm not putting it down, but I wanted to talk to people outside the ivory tower more. To me, it was really important that historical literacy in the general population was rising. And those are the sorts of things that were kind of simmering on my mind in 2017. And to give you a very short version of events, I was actually on my way to an academic conference. I remember sitting, I'm in my seat on my plane, looking over the very academic paper that I'm going to deliver in Scotland. Awesome, right? This is all very what professors do. And a gentleman ended up sitting next to me. His background was being a producer at HBO. We got talking about we talked about HBO's John Adams, right? We talked about history being represented in the public and in media. And that conversation, by the time it was over, he's he's the one who put the idea in my head. Said you should start a podcast.
Hmm.
Um, so I did. And History That Doesn't Suck was born few months later. And of course, it grew and grew, and it was both exciting and scary, and it absolutely ended up taking my career in a direction I did not intend on, but I really love.
Well, that's fascinating. So, I mean, the History That Doesn't Suck is a is a very well produced podcast. You do the narration. You're telling stories about American history, almost like you would be in an American history lecture, but maybe a little bit more. You have a little bit of a style that is really engaging. And makes the general audience be able to follow the story that you're telling. But it's also, like I said, really well produced. So, how did you go from this idea, hey, you should do a podcast? You have the substance, you certainly have the knowledge. How did you get this really high quality production that people have come to know and love for the podcast?
It's a really chicken and egg. So,
Mhm.
even as I give you that explanation, it's not like I ever left academia, right? I'm still a tenured professor. But I took all the goodness that academia gave me, the rigor, the digging deep and doing proper research, primary, secondary sources, quality secondary sources. And I dumped all of that into writing. I mean, we call them scripts, but they're effectively book chapters. I kind of think of History That Doesn't Suck really as a long history of the United States being told in
Mhm.
one chapter after another. Each of those episodes represent roughly 9,000 words of
Wow.
writing. They have about 100, some of them go up to 130 or so footnotes to each episode. So it really is like a book chapter or an article as we are, trained to do as academics. But I'm
Mhm.
very intentionally delivering it in colloquial, you know, normal talk. I'm leaving the jargon that's so helpful for us as academics to talk to each other,
Mhm.
but it gets in the way when you're trying to make perhaps complicated and nuanced things accessible. And I do think it's important to also trust the public. People are smart and they can follow it when when we don't bury things in words that just aren't used day in
Right.
and day out. And we keep the stories there that make it engaging. History turns into names and dates when we just lay out events rather than treating people in the past like, the insecure, the excited, the inquisitive, the self-doubting individuals that they really were.
Right.
And in fact, really, not to put the cart ahead of the horse here, but that kind of gets to my book in a way,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
That
for sure, yeah.
recognition that the past was a scary place, just like today.
Right. So you also have a stage show, a live stage show, and I know you're going to be in New York City and in Boston and Washington, DC in the upcoming weeks. Tell us a little bit about that. And I also have to ask this question. I mean, how does a historian also have a live stage show? Do you have a background in acting and stage performance, anything like that?
You know, not in a big way. I did crush it in middle school drama class.
Okay. Okay.
I was often the lead in
Mhm.
7th, 8th grade, but wasn't on the stage, apart from playing in bands. I played guitar, I played bass, so I did
Okay.
that through high school.
Mhm.
But in terms of, dramatic delivery, no, that was more something that I realized in the classroom. It was part of what my producer friend on the airplane
Mhm.
took notice of as we discussed. And what gave me even the idea to format HTDS as I started thinking through doing a podcast the way that I did. I've always been a natural storyteller. Now, I have flexed and developed that muscle far more with the podcast than I ever did as a purely traditional, grad student and then young professor. Um, but my penchant for stories, it's one of the things I always loved about Abraham Lincoln, that the value of a story, the way that it can teach a lesson, the way it can
Mhm.
suck someone in. Yeah, that was always who I was. So, I guess you could say, perhaps I was an actor and didn't realize it.
Yeah, that's true. It might have been. That was kind of this latent, talent that you didn't know until you tapped into it. I mean, I think that definitely has to be the case. One more question before we go on. I want to talk a large part about your book that has recently come out. But we met because we're working on this film, Young Washington, together, and we filmed some educational content
Yeah.
for this film. So tell me about your involvement with it, and can you tell us, this film's coming out July 3rd, if you wanna talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so the film is Young Washington, and it's effectively a, cinematic biography of George Washington when he was young, and this gets back to history that doesn't suck. The, folks at Angel, working on this film, they stumbled upon the podcast, and,
Right.
so
Okay.
they reached out and said, "We're making a movie that really has a lot in common with, in terms of
Oh,
the focus with your first episode." Which my first episode is George Washington as a young man and how and why he ended up at Fort
okay.
Necessity and the fallout there. So they asked me if I would be a historical consultant, and that's that's been different and unique, and I've really enjoyed that process, and of course learned a bit about film and the
Right,
different tensions there between
right.
storytelling and
Well, that's
where
different from what you do, from your podcast. That is different, filmmaking, right? Than what
yes, yes, it is. And of course, I'm not in the driver's seat, and that's okay, right? And there's a consultant, but yeah, I consulted on that. And then of course we got to, which I thought was so unique and cool. I'd
Mhm.
love to see more historical films. Say, hey, let's invite some historians to sit down and let's hash on some of the liberties that we did take,
Right,
and just very break the fourth wall. I loved
right.
that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's gonna be a really important shoulder content for the film as, when the film is released. But I think we all agree that even though some of the details of that film aren't doesn't follow exactly the George Washington story and the history, that the general arc of a young George Washington is adhered to in the film, which is exciting.
It is, and I mean, I've heard stories of other historians who've been consultants on films, and I felt I was respected in the process, even
Mm.
when, they said, "Well, thank you for that note, we're not gonna take it." It wasn't this, like, derisive, "Oh, the academic," right?
Mhm.
It was, "No, thank you, and here's our take on why we're gonna do that."
Right.
So, it was a really good experience, and I also think, Colleen, that this is the sort of thing more of us professional, trained historians really should be doing.
Mhm.
Um, it's important that we are engaging with the public, and even with art that isn't going to be that academic article that's peer reviewed, but nonetheless is going to have an impact on how people understand and think about history.
Right. So let's move on to your book. So,
Let's do it.
when did the book come out? Tell us.
So, the official publication date is June 16th. So,
Okay, so it's okay,
we're
okay.
actually just let's just talk like it's out because, of course, I'm
Okay,
not going to
okay.
go ahead and
I got
order
I didn't
it.
realize I had an advanced copy. Okay, so
Oh, you
we're
do?
marching
Colleen,
towards
you are
okay,
that special. You
yeah,
get the
okay,
advanced copy.
okay. So we're marching towards the publication date. So this is great because this will tell people about the book before it's even out. They can pre-order it and they can it can be coming to in process of
Absolutely.
coming to them
Eh,
either
but a short
electronically
wait,
or actually
a
in the
a
mail.
a whopping week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a whopping week.
I
Okay,
guess
great.
that's a long time in the 21st century, but, come on.
Right, right. It's
Some
very
books take that long even after publication if you order it.
Well, it's a great book, and the title is Been There, Done That. Tell us, I mean, you have oh, there you go.
There you go.
Perfect. Now you have 2 main, I think, arguments in the book, or 2 main, things that you're trying to promote, 2 main thesis statements. So can you tell us what those are up front? What are you trying to argue in this book?
Yeah, so I do like leaning on my dear friend, Mark Twain,
Mhm,
or at least what he's alleged to have said. First is simply that our supposedly unprecedented times just are not that unprecedented. So, as
mhm,
Mark Twain is alleged to have said, that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I'm saying that there's a lot of rhyming going on right now in our political discomfort and political challenges. And the second piece to that is because of that rhyming. Again, I'll borrow from Mark Twain, who is alleged to have said that the rumors of his death had been exaggerated. Well, the rumors of the American Republic's impending doom, death, however you want to phrase that, are also deeply exaggerated. Because, Colleen, to me, our history, where we can see where so many of the challenges that we're facing today have in fact happened before, and specifically, I'm talking about contested elections. I'm talking
mhm,
about political violence, fake news. These are things we have
mhm.
faced, we have beaten, and we've overcome them. And so the
Right.
fact that we've done it before, my framework isn't to look on the past and say, "Oh, look at America failing to live up to its ideals." My framework is to say we have such wonderful ideals, and we should be striving for them without excuse. And yet, we are going to fall short. And how magnificent is it that when we fall short, we are able to bounce back? And
Mhm.
that's what I see in our history. So as we celebrate America 250, I see 250 years of absolutely beautiful ideas, these self-evident truths, the nerve, right? The audacity to assert that there are such things, and us striving to live up to it, us falling short, and us striving yet again. And we not only can see that we have overcome these challenges in the past, but from my perspective, this is the roadmap. It also shows us how we overcome those things. So that is what I'm hoping to accomplish with this book. I tell 8 stories that touch on those 3 major themes: fake news, contested elections, and political violence. And I explain we stare into the abyss together as we go through these stories. And then we rise from that abyss to see how America's overcome it and talk about how that's applicable today.
Now, what do you say? Like, I would think some people might say, well, okay, but you're really minimizing the challenges that we're facing today. I mean, do you think that people might, I say, criticize the book, that they might quibble with the book in this way, saying, hey, listen, this is trying to say that oh, we've seen this before, but aren't we in don't we have some difficult times ahead? Or we don't want to diminish what people are actually feeling right now.
No, not at all. And I hit that very hard right in the introduction that I'm not minimizing the challenges we're facing right now by any stretch of the means. And in fact, my message isn't that the American Republic will pull through. No, it's that it can pull through.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
I believe that it will, but I believe that because what I see as a historian is a pattern of Americans every time we do push ourselves to the brink. And
Hmm.
that is, again, acknowledging the very real pains we're feeling in the present, that I would use the word brink, that we have chosen to come back, that there's a combination of the structure that is our federal republic and who the American people ultimately choose to be, the willingness to finally yield to our better angels, if we can go a little Lincoln there, that continues to bring us back. I hope and believe that 21st century Americans are going to make that same choice again, but there are no guarantees either. And in fact, let's also be clear. Look, if I didn't think that today had serious challenges, I wouldn't have written the
You
book.
wouldn't have written the book.
Right?
Yeah, that's the point
Yeah,
of writing the book. Yeah, to give
exactly.
people context. So, I mean, you said there's there. What I like about the book is that you make this claim, but then you have, 8 episodes or 8 case studies, I guess you could say, that provide the evidence to support, what you assert in the introduction. So, we'll go through a few of those chapters, but then
Yeah,
we'll let people, we want people to read the entire book and understand it. Your first chapter is about essentially a newspaper war in the 1790s that you claim really rivals anything we see on social media today. So can you tell us about it?
absolutely. So here we are in the Washington administration, right? George Washington, the great capital F
Mhm.
founding father, if you will. And who's in his cabinet? Again, illustrious names. We're talking Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. And those two in particular are the ones really behind the entire clash. So we see the very men who gave, uh, you know, who gave us some of these beautiful ideals, who put that quill to paper, they're the ones that are now exhibiting the sort of behaviors that we look at today and say, oh, this is what kills the republic. We've got two gazettes, the Gazette of the United States and the National Gazette, each of which very quickly become our first national papers and become basically the partisan rags of the emerging first party system. The Federalist Party, which is backing Alexander Hamilton and his ideas for a very robust union and an integrated economy. And then the National Gazette, which is very much, in fact, it's not just falling in line, but is quite literally founded to counter the Gazette of the United States
Mhm.
and slam it. They're writing under pseudonyms, so fake names, basically just like someone getting on social media today with a fake handle and
Mhm.
using some sort of false image and posting whatever they want. They're slamming each other. One of my favorites, I mean, wow. Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State, he gets Philip Freneau to run this rag on
Right.
his behalf, right? He's paying Freneau with state funds.
Yeah.
He's subsidizing
He
this
subsidizes them.
newspaper, yeah,
Right.
to
'Cause otherwise he
attack.
wouldn't be making the money, so he gives them a government job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that is wild, right? This is crazy. And again, who's doing this? We have the man who is most credited for the Declaration of Independence doing this to take down the most prominent author of the Federalist Papers.
Right. Mhm. The
See,
war
this is
between Hamilton and Jefferson is real, right? I mean, John Adams gets kinda stuck in between, but it's really between these 2 guys, right?
it is. And of course, things with John Adams, they come to a bust too.
Mhm.
And while that's a smaller piece, but I get to that in the book even,
Right.
that there's a falling out between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. They don't talk to each other for a full decade.
Right.
Here's here's the seated president of the United States leaving office, John Adams. He refuses to go to Thomas Jefferson's inauguration. I mean, that's bad blood. We
Because
talk
there's
about that
things in
like,
the
oh my
paper,
gosh,
right?
that's mind blowing today,
There's
right?
things in the paper that are written about Adams that Adams says are not true, right? And this,
Yep,
this bothers him and it also bothers Abigail, right? Abigail's not
deeply.
happy. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
this stuff is pretty nasty. It gets very nasty back and forth. There's a cartoon of George Washington being guillotined,
yeah,
I mean, these are pretty bad things.
it is right on par in my estimation, and by all means, I feel I bring the receipts. Feel free to look at my
Yeah,
100 pages of endnotes and bibliography, uh, leading you right back to every issue of every newspaper I cite for this. But they are just as cruel, hyper-partisan, willing to twist and misrepresent one another as anything you see out there today. And this is the 1790s. We're not even out of the first
right.
presidency. This is the Washington administration, and we're talking founding fathers.
Okay, so let's move it to 1828. It's 1824 and 1828, but
Yeah,
1828's the biggie because it's the reprise of
yeah.
John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. And
Round
I
two.
had to, I didn't know this. I had to laugh because, and you also tell these stories with a degree of humor attached to them. You're not
Thank
making
you.
anything up, but sometimes these things are just funny. And and John Quincy Adams is intuited that he's a pimp.
The
There's
pimp of the coalition, to be
right,
precise. Yeah,
right. I mean, there's actually someone who dies because of this. I'll let you tell that
yeah.
story. So how do we get to this point in 1828 and really, how bad was it? How nasty was it?
Oh, it's everything you'd see today, if not more. I mean, look,
Probably
the
worse. Mhm.
it is. Look, the election of 1828. So first of all, let's just dial it back for a second. There's a reason I start with the election of 1824 because we
Right.
are coming out of the alleged era of good feelings. So
Mhm.
by the time we get to the election of 1816, the Federalist Party has effectively become defunct. It's just fallen apart. So everyone is a Jeffersonian Republican. Here's the problem. What does it mean to be a Jeffersonian Republican if everyone is a Jeffersonian Republican? It loses all meaning. So you've got four candidates in the election of 1824, all running under this very broad uh, appellation. And that election ends with Andrew Jackson getting the largest number of votes, but failing to get a plurality. And he walks away bitter and angry. And basically, it took us all of one election cycle to split into two parties again. Now, it takes a few more years, but by the time we get to 1828, yeah, we've got national Republicans and we've got the democracy, as they call themselves. This is the origin of, you know, ideology and platforms shift wildly and change, right? But this is technically the origin of the modern Democratic Party under Andrew Jackson. So I think it's telling to see that one, we killed our parties, right? We were supposedly partisan free. We're just going to be this virtuous republic that only looks at the ideas of candidates instantaneously. We're like, nope.
Mhm.
Let's form partisan hackery and do it again. And you've got these newspapers slamming one another. Andrew Jackson even tells the newspapers backing him to back off. He disapproves of the things they're saying. He can't rein them in. I have to imagine that there has been a candidate today who's looked at something that a super PAC has said or
Yeah,
written,
right.
right? And been like, oh my gosh, this isn't how I want to win.
Yeah. Mhm.
But you can't
You
distinguish
can't
what the
control it. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, and so you've got that same sort of dynamic playing out. So here's John Quincy Adams, one of the most curmudgeonly and stoic, and just I
I would
respect.
think the opposite of a pimp. I don't know.
That's what I mean. Like you couldn't have a
John
more
Quincy Adams.
boring. Got brilliant, so brilliant. I love and respect what he did. But we talk about a boring guy. And and the Jacksonian papers say he is a pimp, that while he was representing the United States in Russia, that he procured American girls for the insatiable lusting czar.
Mhm.
Absolutely
Mhm.
ridiculous. Not a shred of truth
And
in
there's no
this.
evidence to it, right? They track
No.
it, and there's no evidence. There's nothing. This is just made up. Mhm.
Zilch. Yeah. So fake news, anyone?
Mhm.
And there's no one to stop it. It's going around unchecked. So this is when Colleen, I'm not dismissing the issues in the present. I'm not saying that this should be acceptable. We, the people, have to hold the media accountable for this sort of stuff. But I just want to know when this golden age of this perfect media um, existed.
Mhm.
And what we've always had are good actors in the media and good actors in our government and bad actors all at the same time. That is the constant. And if we understand Federalist number 10, that's exactly what James Madison was effectively saying. Well, Federalist 10 and 51. Between those two, I think he makes a very sound argument to say, look, you don't get liberty without partisanship, period. You can't have the one without the other.
You can only
Okay,
control the effects, right? You try to control the effects, but not the
bingo.
cause, you
Yeah,
know? Mhm.
and you are quoting him, and I love
Mhm.
that you're doing it. Thank you. Right, and
Yeah.
then Federalist 51, where he says men are not angels, or as I like to read
Mhm.
it, people suck. Right,
Mhm.
this is reality, and that's always been a constant. And Americans, it never have the luxury of not guarding against it.
Yeah.
So
But to go back to 1828, even it gets worse because what happens with
yeah,
Jackson and his mother and his wife?
oh, absolutely, yeah. We got to save the best for last, can't, but
Yeah.
also won't bury the lead. So Andrew Jackson's mother. The newspapers say that she was, and forgive me for just sharing exactly what the primary sources say, that she was a whore who bedded redcoats during the Revolution. Colleen, I know you know this. The woman died after getting ill taking care of American POWs
Right.
on British prison ships.
Mhm.
She she's an American patriot who died for the revolution effectively, leaving Andrew Jackson orphaned.
Mhm.
And that's what they write about her.
Right.
In this era of race-based slavery, they also try to, they claim that Andrew Jackson is a, quote, mulatto, that is part black. Again, trying to basically say in this era of race-based slavery, racism, that effectively he shouldn't qualify for president of the United States. And then, of course, his wife, Rachel. Andy keeps her because he's Andy to me, you know?
Mhm.
You know my
I
style.
like your
I
nicknames.
get
Yeah, they're
personal
fun.
with all of
Yeah.
them, yeah. And to me, that's important that we need to remember that these people were just that they were people.
Right.
So, Andy, he keeps his wife, who he loves so deeply. I
Yeah.
mean, talk
Devoted to
about we
Mhm.
I look at John and Abigail Adams, and I look at
Mhm.
Andrew and Rachel Jackson. These are couples that most of us just wish we could have a relationship like. Um Not saying anything about perhaps other characteristics, but they nailed romance, and he's protecting his beloved wife from this. He's trying to shield her from the things that are being written and said about both of them. Well, after the election, Andy's won. Andrew Jackson is heading to the White House. She goes shopping to get dressed to wear the first ball, and as she's resting, she's at um, she's over at a relative's office, and she dares to pick it up. Starts reading some literature, and this is where she first reads accusations that she's a bigamist, right? All sorts of things about her sex life, and she was in bad health to begin with. But it's only she falls into a deep depression. Only days later, suffers a massive heart attack, and then another one follows. She's dead. She's dead in a matter of days.
And
And
Jackson blames he says this is the reason.
yes, on the day that he lays her on, in the earth of the Hermitage, their plantation, um, their plantation home in Tennessee, with a light rain falling. He says, may God forgive," right?
Yeah.
Basically, those newspaper editors, as I know she would have forgiven them. I never can, and he
Yeah.
never did.
Yeah, he
So
does.
it's
Mhm.
not a direct cause. It's not like an assassination,
Mhm.
but there is no other election, Colleen, where we can genuinely mount
Right.
the argument that libel killed the spouse of a candidate.
Right. Mhm. It's very nasty. It's really, it's unbelievable. Okay, so then, one more example, and this one we've talked about the media, that was
Mhm.
good. We talked about nasty election, 1824 that leads us into 1828. Now let's talk about political violence. And of course, one of the most famous episodes of political violence in American history is the caning of Sumner, right? And,
Yeah.
I thought this was a really I mean, I knew about this, but I didn't know all to tell you the truth, all the intricate details that lead up to the violence. One of the things I found very interesting was this notion of Southern honor that motivates a lot of what happens, and it certainly doesn't condone it, but it helps explain why these things happen. So tell us a little bit about this notion. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I grew up going to Gettysburg and all those things. We The notion of Southern honor wasn't something that was covered, for example, in my high school history class, to be able to explain why these things mattered and influenced people's actions. So tell us a little bit about Sumner and really how horrific the actual violent act was.
Jeez,
It
yeah.
wasn't just like I'm gonna tap you over the head and you get a couple cuts. I mean, he
No,
was
this is
killing.
brutal. I mean, let's
Yeah,
start there, right? The beating itself. So you want to talk about a breakdown in terms of how our legislators are interacting with each other. Preston Brooks, Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina, goes into the Senate chamber. Let's start here, then we'll get to the honor
He's a
commissions,
houseman,
right?
so he kinda
Yeah.
gets his way in,
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
he's welcome. He belongs in the Capitol. It's where he's supposed to be, right? So he goes into the Senate chamber. He approaches Charles Sumner, who is seated at his desk. Now, this is, it's an earlier form of Congress. There's no canon building for our DC,
Mhm.
people who are listening. The House, the Senate, they don't have their offices as they do today. So they would work at the actual desks in the chambers. And there's Charles Sumner seated at his desk. He's preparing mailers. Basically, he's getting his email list ready, or rather his social media posts lined up, if you will,
'Cause
to
he's made
send
a
out.
big speech, and he wants to get it out there. Mhm.
Oh, we'll get to that speech, Colleen. That's right. So he's doing exactly the sort of PR tactics that we really are doing today. He's just doing it in the 19th century fashion. And as he's sitting there, head down, pen scratching away, Preston Brooks stands over him and says that, Mr. Sumner, you have you insulted, maligned a relative of mine, and and we'll circle back to that. And basically, you deserve punishment. And without a word of warning, he makes this announcement. That's it. Preston Brooks takes his cane and bashes Abolitionist Senator Charles Sumner right on the top of the head. Uh, he blacks out. Like his eyesight, he doesn't go unconscious. He loses his sight for a split second.
Yeah.
And then and Brooks just keeps going. He wallops and
And
wallops
these
and
aren't
wallops.
canes like we're used to today, like, this is like a cane that, I mean, is made of something that's real, I
It's a
mean,
c it's
kind of more
it
substantially built, I guess
Yeah,
you
it's a substance, Gouda, I think is how you say it.
Mhm,
I can write it, I can spell it. As I've
mhm,
learned being a podcaster, you
mhm.
triple check pronunciation before
Yeah.
you start
Mhm.
sounding off. But, this substance is like a really hard rubber.
Yeah.
So basically it's durable, like it shouldn't break, and yet he hits Charles so many times over the head. He manages to actually break it, to crack it in two, and now he's got this splintered cane. Charles, who's 6'4",
Yeah, he's a
okay?
big guy,
He's a
yeah.
huge guy, but he's been caught completely off guard, and the seats in the Senate chamber were bolted to the floor,
So he can't
and
move, you
he
right?
can't. No, he's captive,
He
and,
can't
if
roll away, yeah.
well, if he could gather his senses for a second, that's what he needed to do is just push back, and
Mhm.
he could roll out. But how do you think straight when you can't even see anymore, right? That's how hard your brain that has just the trauma it's just taken in. The adrenaline ripping through him, this true, fight or flight survival mode. He actually rips the desk out of its bolts. No one knew that could even happen, but Preston has the better of him and just bashes and bashes. Preston later wrote uh, to a relative of his. I'm trying to remember if it was his brother or his cousin, but he described, and this just it hits a lot harder for those of us with agricultural backgrounds. He said toward the end, Charles bellowed like a calf.
Yeah, it's very nasty. So, but I have one question before you get on with the rest of the story. So when I was
Yeah,
reading this, the one question I had was, why why didn't someone intervene? I mean, it had to take a little bit of time. I mean, he beat
yeah.
him a lot of times. Why didn't someone rush over and take the cane away from him and say, someone does say stop or something like that, but no one really like intercedes to
So
push him off.
for me, yeah, there are a number of levels here. First of all, is just the absolute shock, right?
Mhm.
That I mean, let's keep this in mind. It's not only an assault on a senator, but this is happening in the US Capitol. In fact, not only in the US Capitol, in the Senate chamber,
Or yeah.
right? This is in violence in the Capitol and even in the Senate chamber. That's not a new thing, right? Joan Freeman has a wonderful book on
Yeah,
that.
right.
But nonetheless, this just is it's absolutely shocking. And so you've got to give everyone ample time to just process that. But then as some start to come forward,
Mhm.
Preston Brooks's buddies, basically his gang, all fellow congressmen, intercede. They step in. So Representative Kitts, for instance, he's standing there with his cane as these elderly senators start coming toward him. Things do change, life expectancy shifts, but a constant, you've always got some pretty old dudes in the Senate.
Yeah.
Same thing here. So as some start to come forward, there's Kitts with his cane going, right, you take another step, I'm going to wallop
Basically
you.
let him go, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so finally, Charles, I mean, he drops on the ground in a pool of his own blood, blacked out, and Preston cleans himself up, gets a stitch or two himself because his splintering cane actually sliced him, and then goes and gets a dinner
Okay.
with friends. Yeah,
But leading up to this is, obviously over slavery, but it's like I said, it's also about this notion that Sumner
honor.
attacked, right, what another South Carolina, colleague, right?
Yes, Senator Andrew Butler, who's also kin to
Kin.
Preston Brooks, right?
Mhm.
They are cousins. So Charles, my buddy Charles Sumner, he gave a speech, but 2 days earlier, in which in the whole fight over what's going to happen with Kansas, is this slave or free? He shredded some of his Southern colleagues. And Andrew Butler in particular, he mocked the man who has a partially paralyzed face from a stroke. He mocks his physical disability. He refers to him as lying in bed with the whore that is the slave power. So he's implying that this Southern gentleman basically beds whores. Apparently, whore is the way to insult people in the
Well,
mid
it's
19th
interesting
century,
how women get caught up in all of this, even though
isn't
right?
it?
I mean, that's a whole other thing we could talk about at some point. Yeah.
Well, but we'll do another one sometime.
Yeah. Mhm.
We can dive into that. Yeah. But this is an absolute affront to Andrew Butler. Right? He has been insulted. His honor has been insulted. And so, as I do explain, right, in some detail in the book, that honor, which is a concept that was really important in the United States, in particular, because we don't have titles.
Mm.
So honor becomes this way in a titleless society to distinguish basically who's better than another. In the North, that starts to fall apart as we start to see industrialization take off. Basically, the embryo of corporate life starts to give people some sense of hierarchy, and people stop thinking, you know what we should do? Retreat to the field of honor and possibly kill each other over insults. But in the more agrarian South, and perhaps particularly in a world where those who are planters are also enslavers and need this structure to justify superiority, right? Uh, it not only holds on, it very much continues. And
Yeah.
it's especially strong in South Carolina, where Preston Brooks is from.
Right.
So, in his concept of Southern honor, and by the way, the cane, carrying a cane is, well, it's meant to be an impromptu weapon. You
Oh,
carry, yeah, so you carry a cane, and you would use it on those who don't deserve a proper duel.
like a duel that you would actually make an appointment and you have to,
Yes,
you have all these things, but if that's not gonna work, then you go right to the
you do.
yeah, the
And so there are so many layers to this, Colleen.
yeah,
Um,
it was fascinating to me. I just didn't know that much about Southern honor, per se as a topic, and I thought that was a really great way into this story.
well, thank you. And we'll kind of leave the tease there in part to, think about time. But in short, you've got a Southern congressman who feels that a Northern senator doesn't have the honor, doesn't merit the invitation
Right.
to a duel, and is only worthy of a beating that must be done in order to restore the
The
honor of Andrew Butler, which Andrew, being physically
right,
disabled himself, is not in a position to stand up for his own honor. Ergo, Preston Brooks must do so on behalf of his kin.
okay. So the last question before we log off here today is, we can agree that, things have been bad before and, we're not in totally unusual circumstances today. But we could also say that things aren't also not terrific or not great. We have a real strain on our national institutions. There's real concern about civics education. There's all kinds of challenges in the United States today, polarization. So if we could say, okay, we see these antecedents in the background, but we're still not super happy about how things are today. What can we do about it?
It's really annoying, Colleen, in the same way that going to see your doctor can sometimes be annoying when you're talking about general health, and then they tell you all those very boring things like you should really be drinking water and eating your fruits and vegetables and getting some exercise. I do make some prescriptions for things that Americans ought to be doing. Uh, and for me, this harkens back to the concept of public virtue and remembering that the founders, this is the great gift that they gave us. They built a structure that, as Federalist 51 tells us, right, it acknowledges that people suck. So separation of powers, checks and balances, and not just separation of powers on parchment, to use James Madison's word, but meaningful ones that actually incentivize those holding these positions to guard their own power. And so they're going to want to pull down the other branch if it gets too much power. Now, what's too much power? Right? I'm not saying that they're going to push back when we want them to push back, as early as we might like them to push back. But that system has by and large held for us. And it's held in part because there's another important piece. You can have the best structure in the world. And I might even argue that the United States does. Um, our federal republic is robust and incredible. But all the guardrails in the world aren't going to stop you from driving off the cliff if you're determined to do so. That's where the public virtue piece comes in. And it doesn't mean every single American, but enough of us have to ask, not what our country can do for us, but what we can do for our country. Enough of us have to remember that we have nothing to fear but fear itself and turn to civics. We need to be engaged. That doesn't mean you got to run for Congress, but it does mean that you are an active participant in the electoral process, not just showing up on election day. And I get into some of those details on, how we participate in our municipal government, how we participate in the party system, how that works. Our social media is blamed for things without us ever taking much responsibility, I'd argue. We need to curate our media consumption, just like you can't blame the fact that there's fast food on every corner for an awful diet. Of course, you're going to go enjoy that burger and fries on occasion. I'm not even faulting someone for that. But if that is the only food you consume, you're going to get pretty unhealthy pretty quick.
Yeah.
And we have to be thinking about what we're doing, not just letting the algorithms guide us the same way that signs on the freeway could guide us to fill in the blank fast food locations day in and day out. So I believe that we've got to be mindful of what we're consuming, and right along with that, we've got to be perpetual learners. We need to know enough of just general knowledge that we can push back and question our elected officials and know whether they're making a good point or they're not. What are tariffs a tax or not? Right? These are things that we should be able to ascertain and think through. To just give a modern example, and at the end of the day, Colleen, I am saying that I do trust Americans to do that sort of critical thinking.
Yeah.
We might check out on occasion. Uncle Sam might get a little out of shape, but for 250 years, he's chosen to get back to the gym when things got far enough out of hand. And I'm hoping that this might be a piece that helps us to remember that, first of all, we have won titles, right? We can get back into fighting shape, and two, give a little bit of a roadmap to how we do it.
A little bit of perspective too. So thank you, Greg, so much for joining us. If you haven't checked out Greg's podcast, History That Doesn't Suck, People Suck, but History That Doesn't Suck. So please check that out. He's also, like I said, going live on the road for his history show, where you'll also be featuring your book, which comes out in just a week's time. But thank you so much for joining In Pursuit, and we'll make you part of the In Pursuit family. We're so excited about this.
I'm honored. And I'll just add, for any and all the things you just mentioned, HTDSpodcast.com. You can find everything there.
And you can find all of your information, your show, the podcast, and the book. Okay,
Yes.
great. Thanks so much, Greg.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.